Hello and welcome to the Capital Call with the Milligan Brothers. I'm Quinn Milligan.
And I'm Drew Milligan.
And you found us again. Thanks for tuning in and happy Monday. So, there's a lot to cover this week. I think the theme for this year in the new administration is trade and tariffs. And so there's a lot to unpack throughout the week that has happened. But I wanted to start out actually with something. For those who don't know, we publish the Milligan Memo every month, which is a few bite-sized pieces of information that we thought was insightful. And the quote we started out with was from value investor, famous Peter Kundil: "Value in an investment is similar to character in an individual. It stands up better in adversity." What do you think of that, Drew?
I mean, of course I'm going to agree with that. We're value investors. Adversity is what tempers our portfolio and leads to higher returns in the long run.
Right. And so, as far as, before I get into it, all the trade business and, there's a lot that's been happening.
Seems like all we talk about these days is trade.
It's important. But before we get into it, for those who don't know, if you wait till the end of this podcast, we got our segment This Day in Economic History, where we got some interesting, wacky stories for you that Drew is unaware of yet, so you get his honest reaction.
Yeah, it seems like I'm always in the dark with this guy.
What can you do? But, before we get into the rest of the trade items, Josh Brown, one of the talking heads on CNBC, actually yesterday, the 29th, today's the aftermarket on the 30th, he pointed out that he said, "My taste doesn't matter when it comes to what to invest in." And it's a really important point that when you look at something, you can't fall in love, and you can't simply invest in something because you like it. It's like if you like going to McDonald's, okay, sure, you look at McDonald's, but don't invest in it just because you go to McDonald's.
Right.
Like, oftentimes we might invest in something that we don't consume, right? And there might be something that we enjoy, but the company is just not a good investment.
Right. And, the converse is also true. You may think this one particular thing that you don't have any interest in is not worth your time investing in, but then it turns out that their particular niche is actually quite profitable. Like they service some hobby and that you had no idea existed, or maybe you work for the company and you think they're garbage operationally, but it turns out they're actually great. I can't tell you how many times we had at the firm I used to work for, we had a client that would work for one of the companies that we were considering investing in, and they go, I'd never make that trade. And or they would actively caution us against it, and they would miss out on the upside. So be careful about your own internal biases because they're blind spots. They're called biases for a reason.
And it can be difficult to separate yourself from it as well, especially if you have a lot of hands-on information. It's like people who have worked at KFC might not eat at KFC anymore.
They gave me food poisoning. That's an anecdotal story. Don't sue me, KFC.
Yeah. Allegedly, he got food poisoning. So as far as trade, there have been a couple of interesting developments. So the Trump administration, the United States and Beijing came to negotiations in Geneva, and apparently they were progressing. We didn't get too many details, but there was a 90-day pause right on the tariffs. And what came out this week was that apparently Beijing is asking for the advanced chip restrictions to be removed. The U.S. is limiting the AI-capable advanced chips from being. There's restrictions on importing them to China, and China wants that removed, right?
Understandably so.
And the Trump administration's posture is that they're not being faithful to the negotiations. People have also said that this is a typical trade tactic from China, where they throw out something that is not necessarily related as a bargaining chip to get something that they really want.
Yeah. And then on the American side, we can talk about Taco that came out this week. Trump was not happy when he heard about this, by the way. He had a reporter ask him in the White House room, "What do you think of the taco trade?" And he goes, "The what?" And he was offended when the reporter explained the acronym stands for Trump Always Chickens Out. And apparently Wall Street traders have taken to using this acronym because inevitably what will happen on the trade talks is that he'll institute some wild, crazy tariff and then back off on it a week or two later as a negotiation tactic. So
So yeah, that's an interesting tidbit. I wonder if that plays into the trade negotiations.
Yeah, in any case, it's apparently an investable acronym. The worry that I saw in the markets was that, if he doesn't he might dig in more on the tariffs now that he's aware that this is a thing that people are talking about. Maybe he just doesn't want to appear weak. That's one criticism I heard. The other one is that it could damage trade negotiations.
Right.
So
It could damage the posture to get the outcome that he ultimately is trying to get as well. So we'll see how that plays out.
yeah, I mean, when you're playing poker, you don't want people calling your bluff.
No, no. And another thing that could throw a wrench into tariffs, and the market loved this. The U.S. Court of International Trade actually, and you could read some details about this in our Milligan memo, but the U.S. Court of International Trade was reviewing a litigation filed by 12 states, actually led by our home state, Oregon, funny enough.
Jointly with businesses as well.
Right. Basically alleging that the implementation of the tariffs were illegal and they were an overreach of the presidential authority where they have power of tariffs in emergency situations. Now, the court actually agreed, and they put an injunction on the use of the April 2nd, reciprocal, quote-unquote, reciprocal tariffs. Now, shortly after, the Trump administration requested to appeal that with the U.S. Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Court of Appeals put a temporary stay on that injunction while they review the administration's request. So briefly, we had no tariffs, and then total reversal, right? It's like, will they or won't they? We just want to know what's going to happen.
I did find it interesting. The trading action that happened the day that particular court ruling came out was really interesting. You had all the retailers jump huge the day after that was announced, and then immediately came back down because the tariffs are still in place.
Yeah, the day that happened, actually, Kohl's had released earnings, and they popped 15+%, so much so that trading halted.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, while trading had halted, the volume moderated.
I think it's actually a really good sign, by the way, that happened, because what appears to have happened is that simultaneously with this good news and the earnings, the shorts probably got squeezed in Kohl's, and there is significant short interest in Kohl's.
Yeah, a good old short squeeze.
Yeah, gotta love the short squeezes when you're the one sitting long.
Right.
It's like the GameStop trade. It reminded me of the GameStop trade a little bit back in the day. So
another tariff update we actually just saw today, not too long ago. The administration wants to raise the steel import tariffs from 25% to 50%. And that's actually an artifact of the first Trump administration back in 2018, and the Biden presidency left it, which was interesting.
Funny thing that, there were studies done of those 2018 tariffs after they went into effect and had been in effect for a few years to see what the actual effect on the economy was. And what they found is that for every steel worker job that was saved, 75 jobs were lost in the industries that use the steel. So this is something that we often say with tariffs, is that if you're not a primary producer, if you're a secondary value add, tariffs are terrible for these things, because those guys rely on those primary goods as inputs for the more complicated items that they produce.
And not only those basic inputs, but actually machinery for some finished goods as well. The machinery itself is imported.
Right. So it's really just not a positive sum game when you put tariffs into place. It's just damaging. Well, with the exception of, I guess, those few steel workers who wound up being employed, but was it really worth losing 75 other jobs for that one job?
Well, also, I saw there was an interview, I think it was with the Harvard Kennedy School. They were talking about U.S. manufacturing is only about 8% of the workforce. I mean, it's not that big of a portion of U.S. employment, and the steel tariffs or the tariffs, in order to promote U.S. domestic manufacturing, even if they were successful, you would see an increase from 8% to 10%.
Right.
Like it wouldn't actually be that impactful to the U.S. economy.
Yeah, we're a nation of salesmen, programmers, and office workers.
Yeah.
You know, it's not we're not it's not the 1970s anymore here, and I often see that. I actually see that statistic pulled out quite frequently as a failure. But in absolute terms, the very interesting thing about that particular figure is it's so low not because we've necessarily lost a ton of manufacturing jobs. We have lost some manufacturing jobs, but it's particularly low as a percentage of total employment because other sectors of the economy have just grown so much. So,
Right.
you can start out with 10 people employed in an industry, and you have 90 people employed in other industries. 10 years later, you still have 10 people employed in that industry, but you have 180 people employed in the other industry. And suddenly, oh no, you've gone from 10% to 5%. Magic. It's just, it's not a great metric, I think, in some respects.
Now, I do see the argument to make sure that the U.S. has domestic manufacturing capabilities.
There are good national security arguments for it.
It's like in World War II, I mean, our actual Navy was terrible in comparison to the Japanese Navy before we actually entered combat, and suddenly we outproduced them because we converted everything we had to military manufacturing. And I guess the question becomes, do we need that capability, and do we weigh that against economic terms? Also, I guess it's a bit different these days because our military is the largest military in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you really need to ramp up manufacturing.
I would contend that you probably, you would still need to ramp up manufacturing. Some people say that the military-industrial complex is such that, we're always in a state of readiness as the U.S., but that's not really necessarily true, especially when you consider the fact that we really haven't fought a land war properly in quite some time now. Even like the Afghan war, we lost so few troops. I mean, the entirety of the Afghan war is the equivalent of what Russia loses in like one day of combat on the Ukrainian line. So I would also argue that the nature of warfare has also changed. I mean, we saw this when there's a company that's publicly traded, H.I. Hunting and Ingalls, that's based out of, it used to be Newport News, I forget what they call it now, but I remember listening to their calls. One of the biggest talking points they always had was that, yes, we produce these gigantic ships for the U.S. Navy, but really the future is not in these gigantic ships because they are kind of inflexible. And nowadays, you can get a lot more bang for your buck by producing drone swarms of unmanned submersible vehicles or unmanned aerial vehicles and whatnot, drones. The future is essentially drone swarms and drone operators when it comes to warfare in a lot of senses, in addition to just regular bombs and air power as well. So I would argue, and the other thing to consider here is that you quoted a little bit earlier the employment in the manufacturing sector, and the data point that obscures is that the U.S. manufacturing base is incredibly productive for the amount of workforce that we use.
Right.
So it is true that there's a big national security reason to try and keep your, at least near shore your supply chains. But, the U.S. punches far above its weight for the amount of employment we have in terms of just manufacturing capabilities, even today. It's not the case that we've been totally eclipsed by China in many respects.
Right.
But, this kind of brings up another point where the Trump administration has repeatedly stated its intent that these supply chains, particularly cars and things like that, should be entirely U.S. based, from part to finished product. And what I was reading this take by an economist I follow, who pointed out that there's basically no such thing as a purely U.S. produced car supply chain. At some point in the process, every single car assembled in the U.S. has parts or components that came from somewhere else and are just being assembled in the U.S.
Yeah, I think the most U.S. made car is the Tesla, and it was still only 87 or 90%.
Right.
Like, it's not like 99.9% or something.
Right. There's this kind of fallacy that some folks, and particularly some politicians, have with regards to domestic economies, and it's this idea that's called autarky, where you should be entirely insular in how you produce things, and that way you don't need to rely on any of your neighbors.
In practice, I can understand the thought process, but if we want a booming economy, free trade, there's nothing beats it.
Right. I mean, it's the same idea even on a micro level. Like, I can't produce nails. I can't even grow my own food. I mean, I've grown potatoes, but like that's just because we live in Oregon and anything grows in Oregon.
Right.
If every person as an individual, and you think about this for yourself, tried to produce everything they consume and use on a daily basis, you couldn't do it. You would be naked and afraid. No clothes, no food, no hope, basically.
Well, it's interesting. I'm reminded of one of the politicians actually made it a digestible way of understanding this trade war against trade deficits. Rand Paul, he made the comparison of trade deficits where it's like, okay, Bangladesh has a huge trade deficit with the United States. That's because Bangladesh is a poor nation and we're a rich nation. We buy things from Bangladesh and they can't afford to buy things back from us. Yep. And he mentioned that every wealthy individual in that room sitting with him right there had a larger trade deficit with Amazon than he did.
Yep.
So it's global trade is fascinating and complex, and it's not, everybody wins with free trade.
Right. And we've talked about this before. There's been a rush to consume the inputs that are critical on the part of U.S. companies that don't know where the tariffs are going from day to day. And back to what's interesting about the lawsuit that was recently won at the lower levels of the trade courts is that it doesn't actually remove all of the tariffs that the administration put in place. To be clear, like what the administration did is it essentially used the wrong part of the law to justify the tariffs it put into place.
And I think the almost exact words from the judge, which was a Reagan appointee, by the way.
God, he's been there forever.
Yeah, at the U.S. Court of International Trade, he said it might be a dandy plan, but it's got to meet statute, and that's what it came down to for the decision. So it's not like a blanket strike down. It's just like you got to go according to what the powers are authorized for.
Right. I have actually been kind of intrigued by the administration this go around because, you remember that first term and they were going through officials like one after the other, and now they seem to be fairly stable by comparison.
Yeah.
They're still not great about following exact statutes they should, but, it's not like the administration can't just get this done by other means.
Right. The prior Trump administration, he'd fire someone every so often and then call him a moron.
Yeah. It made for great television, I guess. We're weirdos. In some ways, we prefer the chaos just for the investing, but, on a personal level, I kind of prefer stability, so.
Right. So it's an interesting contrast, but,
I'm kind of the worst of all worlds politically.
An 85% market decline is an 85% discount, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, if you have the wherewithal to stay in the market when other people exit, it means that's when you get the biggest opportunities. I can't tell you how many times I get pitched a name and it's like, they're at all-time highs and everybody loves this company. It's like that old saying, if your taxi driver's giving you stock tips, it's probably not a good time to buy. So you got to be willing to take a closer look at names that would otherwise cause revulsion.
Yeah. Unless it's a publicly traded taxi company.
Right, unless it's public. Well, not many of those anymore. Unless you count Uber.
Yeah.
Uber is basically a taxi company.
Speaking of, I couldn't think of a transition, to be frank. I don't think this transitions at all.
Speaking of talking.
Yeah, speaking of talking. I'll just get into it, right? It was interesting to see. You saw some of the stuff where people are being tortured for their Bitcoin wallets.
This is why you have central banking systems, so stuff like this doesn't happen. That reminds me of kind of when the pot dealers first got legalized. When marijuana got legalized, and the pot shops all started operating, they all had to operate with cash because there was no banking for them because they were still federally illegal. So you had these pot shops that all had like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in just cash lying around all the time, and they always got robbed. You know, there's a reason that banks exist. They do serve a purpose, as much as some people will try to tell you otherwise.
Well, here's the thing, though. With the Bitcoin wallets, I mean, there are more secure ways that you can store Bitcoin and still not have it stored elsewhere. Like, yes, you can have it in a wallet, and you can have that at, Coinbase or whatever. But there's also, I heard about this service that basically takes your physical Bitcoin wallet, and it's in basically a bank in the Swiss Alps.
Yeah.
And that way you retain all ownership of it, and it's being stored essentially in a bank, which you could do at a safe deposit box.
Again, what are we doing here? Like, that's the whole point of crypto, is to not need the banking institutions. And I guess it's optional with crypto. It's just like...
Well, I see the difference, though, is like you still maintain control over it. You're just paying for custody.
Yes, but by the same token, why not just own a bunch of diamonds? I guess because it's hard to smuggle.
Yeah, and diamonds are a physical asset that becomes difficult.
I suppose, and I guess it's a little bit more stable. When there's a reason we don't link our currencies to commodities anymore, and it's because they're unstable, and you have very little control over them as a central bank.
Yeah.
So it makes a sort of sense that you would prefer to have like some sort of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin as a store of value instead.
But the anecdote I wanted to mention, so this guy, it's two crypto guys, John Waltz, dubbed the Crypto King of Kentucky, and
who appointed him?
Right, and William Duplessis. They were arrested for allegedly kidnapping and torturing a 28-year-old Italian tourist in a $40,000 per month Soho townhouse.
Oh. Wow. And
they were trying to extract his Bitcoin passcode. And according to the authorities, the victim was held captive for 17 days and subjected to electric shocks, threats with a chainsaw, physical assault, and he eventually gave up his passcode, managed to escape, flagged down a police officer while shoeless and bloodied, and the police found the evidence at the scene, Polaroid photos, weapons, narcotics, and so an off-duty NYPD detective, part of Mayor Eric Adams' security detail as well.
Oh, wow.
Allegedly provided unofficial security at the residence and picked up the victim from the airport. Both he and another NYPD officer are on desk duty, pending the investigation.
Wait. The guys that tortured him were cops, and they were put on desk duty?
Well, okay. I guess he was like... I don't know if they paid him or something. Like, somehow he was involved.
So he was just a guy guarding the door, but he didn't know what they were doing.
Right. He was like the bot. Well, how could you not know? I guess it's a $40,000 a month place. There's probably a pretty quiet area.
Man, New York is something else.
Yeah. Now Waltz is estimated to be worth $100 million. The guy who was doing the torturing for the Bitcoin.
The guy that is... How do you get the rest of his assets?
Well, he's the guy who's called Crypto King of Kentucky.
Oh.
And so, if you're worth $100 million, why are you ripping people off for their Bitcoin?
How do you think he got $100 million in the first place?
That's true. So he's been indicted, denied bail, arraignment scheduled for June 11th, and Duplessis voluntarily surrendered to the authorities and awaits his indictment. So, I thought that was an interesting something that happened.
I mean, that's certainly one way to look at it. Interesting.
Yeah, but it represents a security flaw in all these people walking around with their Bitcoin passcodes.
Yeah, because they have to get the passwords out of your brain, so then they just... I mean, these are crimes that happened with cash.
Yeah.
And it's just gotten a little bit more... Instead of a physical key, it's a virtual key.
Well, it's a decentralized bank robbing.
Decentralized bank robbery. Yeah, there you go. It's funny how you never really solve these things. You just kind of shift them into different forms.
Yeah.
Speaking of banks, There was also another interesting thing that happened just today, actually, this Friday, where you had Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan. I guess, do you say J.P. Morgan Chase? I always just say J.P. Morgan.
Actually, that's a good point. I guess.
Anyways,
yeah, J.P. Morgan Chase.
Jamie Dimon, the head of J.P. Morgan.
Diamond, not Diamond.
Damon?
No, Diamond. Dimon.
Diamond? What was I saying? Diamond?
Diamond, like the jewel.
Well, he's a diamond in the rough, so I'm calling him Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon was giving a public live interview today and came out incredibly gloomy.
Yeah, it was interesting.
He was saying we need to stockpile bullets. We should be investing in bringing people together and improving the country, and we're not doing that. And he thinks the bond market is going to go crazy in 6 months. He said, well, it could be 6 months or it could be 6 years, but the bond market is going to have issues. And everybody was kind of taken off guard by how negative he was, because he had just been, like, not 2 weeks ago, he was optimistic about everything. So this new appearance was like the first live appearance he had done in a while.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting is that he as the head of the bank doesn't really have his reputation damaged from being very pessimistic. But he could have his reputation damaged if he was optimistic and then something bad happened. Because then he looks like an idiot.
Yeah.
There's no reputational damage for him pointing out all the risks inherent in the market and then nothing happening, because then he just looks like a cautious banker, which is exactly what he wants to be perceived as. And then if he's right and something bad does happen, then he can point to it and he can say, look at this, I was right, I'm a big smart guy. And to be fair, Jamie Dimon is a big smart guy, but it's a very risky position to take, to be pessimistic.
I wonder if he was influenced at all by the Trump administration. I mean, Trump came out and said that he was like he listens to Jamie Dimon speak when he speaks, and he respects his opinion. So I wonder if that had anything to do with how he changed his stance.
Oh, you think Jamie Dimon's playing 4D chess?
Yeah, well, they asked him, the last question was, what would it take for you to run for office? And he said, you want me to tell you the truth? And they said, yeah. And he goes, I would run if I think I could win. And I don't think I could win right now.
Yeah, bankers don't have a good track record of winning. My mind goes to Bloomberg, which he wasn't a banker, but he was, he's a billionaire. Every time he tried running, he would waste billions of dollars and get nowhere.
Whenever I think of Jamie Dimon speaking, I think of that great clip. Jamie, pull up the clip. Put it right here. But the clip where he goes like, we bank countries, we bank. You know what I'm talking about?
I think, is this from a movie?
No. It was an interview with Jamie Dimon where he's going like, somebody's asking him the level of J.P. Morgan Chase's business, and he's like, no, you don't understand. We bank in the X amount of trillions of dollars every hour, and like we bank countries, we bank sovereign wealth funds. Just badass statement.
Well, yeah, it's J.P. Morgan.
Yeah,
it's not only one of the biggest banks. It's got historical significance because J.P. Morgan, the namesake, actually bailed out the U.S. economy multiple times.
Yeah,
back in the days of the panics.
For the listeners, I'll just throw it up here.
Will you?
I will.
Okay.
Will. Jamie, put up the clip. Jamie Dimon, do it.
Jamie Dimon. Take it away, Jamie.
Take it away.
If you want to do what J.P. Morgan does, we move $10 trillion of money around the world every day. We bank some of these companies in 30 countries. We bank countries. We bank the World Bank, the IMF. We bank the United States government. You have to be big.
And another thing that happened this week, Elon Musk officially left Doge as the president put it, very, very special government employee. And so don't know what the implications are going to be for policy or government spending, but quite an interesting interview. Don't know if it's really worth diving into, but worth checking out, paying attention to,
Yeah. He came in, pressed Control-Alt-Delete on anything that wasn't nailed down, didn't ask too many questions, did a couple keyword searches, and left as fast as he showed up.
Spent $100 million on the campaign, and I was kind of surprised they gave him like a going away because he was criticizing the administration over the big beautiful bill increasing the deficit.
Yeah, that bill is all sorts of questionable. I mean, they're cutting scientific research. They cut all the Medicaid, and some people like that, but it's like, I mean, you're gonna spend more on the back end helping people that just decided not to go to it. It's not great. The deficit's planning to is projected to shoot up.
Yeah, and that's why Musk was criticizing it, is because you did all these cuts and somehow the deficit is increasing.
Right. The ironic thing about all the cuts that Doge attempted is that there's zero evidence that they actually saved anybody any money, and there's a lot of good evidence that they actually spent a heck of a lot more money in the process of trying to cut money.
I mean, I like the idea of government becoming more efficient. It's just like we have inspector generals, we have reporting on government spending, and I think there would have been a better systematic approach to review, go before the Senate, propose after findings. But, we'll see. Yeah. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, Jamie Dimon even pointed this out when he gave his live address today, where, there's already an office that kind of does that, but it's just for Congress,
right,
that audits all the spending and tries to optimize. So it was Doge, in an ironic twist, turned out to be a redundant waste.
Yeah, a little bit ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like it's about time for this day in economic history. And I have a couple of interesting things here for you. Let me just, get out my monocle.
Quinn doesn't like it when I say this, but he does have slightly worse vision in one eye. And I keep bugging him that he should have a monocle, because he's got a legitimate medical reason for one.
When have I ever said I disliked that?
I always get the impression you didn't like me bringing it up. Am I wrong?
I think maybe it was just that it was, totally irrelevant.
Whatever.
I could rock a monocle.
Yeah.
So, okay. Couple of things here are not expressly related. Maybe a little bit, one of them. But the first one I just thought was interesting. And again, this is May 30th. So, May 30th, 1806. Was actually the day that future U.S. President, and I'll make you name who it was, in 1806, future U.S. President, blank, kills Charles Dickinson in a duel.
Oh, Andrew Jackson.
Yep, on the money. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, well, that guy is the only possible candidate when you mention murder. That guy got in so many duels. One time, he survived an assassination attempt because the would-be assassin's gun... The would-be assassin had two guns, and they both misfired, and Andrew Jackson beat him with his cane.
That is crazy.
That guy was too angry to die.
Yeah, seriously. So, May 30th, 1899, Pearl Hart, a female outlaw of the Old West, robs a stagecoach 30 miles southeast of Globe, Arizona. She was a Canadian-born outlaw of the American Old West, and she committed one of the last recorded stagecoach robberies in the U.S., and it gained a lot of notoriety primarily because she was a woman. Details of her life are pretty uncertain and often contradictory, but, that was right at the turn of the century, one of the last stagecoach robberies.
Truly the end of the Old West.
Yeah.
I was reading an analysis by funnily enough, a webcomic artist and author, Zach Weinersmith. He wrote the book.
I'll refrain from any comments.
Yeah, he wrote the book A City on Mars, which is a great take on space law that often gets overlooked, and the potential of the practicalities of actually going to Mars. But one of the key focuses he had in that book was the concept of a frontier. And in analyzing what a frontier means, the West has been mythologized in ways which may or may not have actually been accurate. I mean, the guys that were icons of the West were mythologized while they were still alive in books and, newspapers and everything like that.
Can you imagine how bad those guys smelled?
I can't imagine. Not showering imagine going on a permanent camping trip. That's what these guys were doing all the time. No wonder they were so angry and drunk all the time. It's the only way you could get through the day.
Are you telling me Red Dead Redemption is not entirely historically accurate?
People will call you smelly in that game if you don't take a bath.
That's
regularly.
true. That's true.
It's more accurate in some ways, but yeah, it's always surprising. The last Stagecoach robbery was 1899. I actually would have pegged it as later than that because Stagecoaches ran for some time after that.
Yeah, I mean it was one of the last. It was probably the last notable one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably been a Stagecoach robbery in, I don't know, 2017 at a reenactment or something.
In some country where they're still using stagecoaches. Right. I think what it is that stagecoaches stopped being a worthwhile way to either travel or move valuables long before they actually stopped being used fully.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
And now you can just rob someone's Bitcoin wallet.
Yeah, that's a modern stagecoach robbery, You pick them up in an Uber and rob them of their Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, a couple other things here. So, on May 30th, 1934, I'll do trivia again for you. The Tokyo-based Jidosha Saizo Kabushiki Kaisha adopted the name of this car company.
That was very brave of you to try and pronounce that.
Yeah, I am sure I'll be murdered in the comments.
What was the year?
1934.
Okay.
This marked the beginning of one of Japan's major automotive manufacturers, which would later become a significant player in the global automotive industry. Now, obviously, it can only be a handful of names, right?
Right. And it would have to be... I mean, it survived the war. Admittedly, though, Volkswagen doesn't like to talk about what they were doing during the war either.
Yeah, don't ask Hugo Boss about their summer 1942 collection.
Yeah, I just can't believe they survived. Would it be Hyundai?
Wrong country.
Oh, that's Korea. Ooh, that's a faux pas. Nissan?
Yeah, Nissan.
Nissan!
Nissan!
Hey, Nissan!
And for my last tidbit of information, does the name Milton Bradley mean anything to you?
You mean like the tank? Or
I think
that's not the Bond guy, is it? That's not the junk Bond guy?
No, similar. That's Milton Friedman.
Yeah, that's what I was... No, Michael Milken.
Oh, Michael Milken. Milton Friedman, somebody else.
Milton Friedman is an economist.
Yeah.
I have to say, I didn't think he invented junk bonds.
No. Okay, so Milton Bradley, born November 1836, died on May 30th, 1911. And people might recognize it. It's a
toy brand.
Yeah, toy, game brand, that kind of thing. And he was one of the... he kind of was considered among those industrialists where in the turn of the century...
He was one of the robber barons.
The robber barons, yeah. So he was an American business magnate, yeah, that's a good word, game pioneer and publisher. And he's credited with kind of launching the board game industry. And he had... So one of his games that really took off, he released The Checkered Game of Life.
Oh.
Yeah.
It came out earlier than I would have thought.
In winter 1860.
1860?
Yeah.
What? Pre-Civil War?
Yeah. And also, so Bradley's ventures into the production of board games began actually with a large failure in his lithographic business. He printed and sold an image of the little-known Republican presidential nominee, you probably never heard of him, Abraham Lincoln. And it was initially met with great success. However, Lincoln decided to grow a beard. And after Bradley's print was published, leading the customers to demand their money back because the image was no longer accurate. And it suddenly became worthless, and he burned his remaining inventory. And that's when he found the inspiration for... I guess it was from an imported board game that a friend gave him. And he thought he could produce a similar one for American consumers, and that was that Checkered Game of Life.
Now, that wasn't... Hasbro was the company that did Monopoly, right? Adapted it from the Landlord's game.
No. I think it was originally like Parker or something.
But they were eventually acquired by Hasbro.
Yeah, but I think most of them were acquired by Hasbro, including Milton Bradley.
Yeah, okay, that's why I thought you might have been talking about Monopoly.
And yeah, Milton Bradley Hasbro used the Milton Bradley name until I think it was until like 2000 and let's see if I have it here.
I was about to say, I thought I remembered having like Milton Bradley branded toy sets as a kid.
Yeah. So okay, here I'll go through the timeline for you. So this Checkered Game of Life was an instant success. He sold the first run of several hundred copies in a 2-day visit to New York. By 1861, consumers had bought more than 45,000 copies. And it was similar to American British predecessors. They would spin a teetotum to advance to squares representing social virtues and vices like influence or poverty.
Oh no, he's like the cornflake guy.
Yeah. And apparently there was like a seemingly secure position like fat office. Dangers like prison, ruin, and suicide.
Suicide was in the first game.
Yeah, the first player to get 100 points won the game. And so...
And presumably that lost you a lot of points.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure you'd probably end the game if you committed suicide.
It'd be very interesting if the game kept going.
Right?
You just haunt your opponents.
Yeah.
No, that's when you roll into the sequel game. The game of Afterlife.
The game of... Yeah, you had to buy the sequel. Well, part of the difference in his game was that it embraced like radically different concepts of success. Earlier games, like there was one called Mansion of Happiness created by Puritan people in Massachusetts, focused on promoting moral virtue. Bradley instead defined success in like secular business terms. Life as a quest for accomplishment and personal virtues. So from 1860 through the 20th century, the company, Milton Bradley Company, they dominated American games. Like they had the Game of Life, Easy Money, Candyland, Operation, Battleship.
Candyland?
Yep. And it was a subsidiary. It became a subsidiary of Pawtucket, Rhode Island-based firm Hasbro from the acquisition in 1984, and then was subsequently shut down in 1998. Milton Bradley merged with the Parker Brothers in 98, and the two became brands of Hasbro until 2009, when they retired that in the favor of just Hasbro.
See, that's why I remember the brand name. So they didn't
Right.
retire the brand name until 2009. That
Right.
makes sense.
So it had been in use for 149 years.
What a shame.
Yeah, but, RIP, May 30th, 1911, the Milton Bradley passed away.
Well, over 100 years ago.
One of the most successful American entertainment brands in history.
Yeah. I'm quite partial to diplomacy myself.
Ooh, that diplomacy has broken friendships, marriages, companies, maybe even countries.
You can play that by mail. I've seen chairs thrown over diplomacy.
Yeah.
It just encourages you to sucker people into a plan, and then you lie, and everybody gets mad, or I get mad. It's, a good, accurate representation of diplomacy. Nobody has enough power on their own to affect change, so they trick other players into doing it. It's very ruthless.
Oh, it is. And eventually, if you don't make a move, you'll be backstabbed, because only one person can win unless there's a diplomatic win. The last time I played diplomacy, I was on the outs, and Morgan Reed, if you're listening, shout out. He was not happy. Let's just put it that way.
You always expect the backstab, but somehow when it comes, you're always offended.
Yeah, but much love, Morgan. It's nothing personal, just business.
It's just business.
So, on that note, it's been a relatively short, digestible episode for you guys. But we will catch you on the flip side next week. I hope you have a wonderful week. Have a great day. The weather's turning in Oregon. We're happy. So we'll catch you next week, Monday morning, every single Monday morning. Until next time.
Yeah, until next time, stay liquid.
Indeed. Stay liquid, my friends.